The first years following the war between the states were difficult for Caldwell County. It was a period of economic and personal hardship throughout the United States. Large portions of the South were slow to recover from the war's devastation. Union General George Stoneman's raid through the area was Caldwell County's only direct brush with the war. However, for a period of time after the war's end, bushwhackers continued to seek vengeance in the county, particularly in the northwestern communities. Their targets seemed to be the people with whom they had a private grudge rather than with the populace as a whole. William R. Trotter stated in his book, The Bushwhackers,
"There were no large battles fought in these mountains during the Civil War, and yet there was no region in the state which endured more violence over a comparable period of time."
Nancy Alexander states, and here will I dwell.
When the war ended, Caldwell, as the rest of the South, before any provisional government had been set up, was left without any law enforcement officers. The Home Guard, with the help of returning Confederate soldiers, served in this interim, attempting to enforce order.
The county paid a huge price for its participation in the war. The loss of some of her finest young men was devastating to the county's future. Many of the soldiers who did come home were wounded, maimed, and demoralized, further hindering the county's recovery. With the ending of the war, former slaves began to experience their newly granted freedom.
Although freedom was a much desired commodity among the slaves, its reality brought many fears and apprehensions among the freedmen. Many of them had been separated from family members. They had nowhere to go to reconnect with loved ones. They had no monetary or intellectual means of surviving in this new freedom adventure. Some freed slaves remained on their former master's land, working as tenant farmers. Others moved off the farms, establishing dwellings in Freedmen and the West End communities, just outside Lenore's town limits. Many found employment as domestic workers for some of the families in Lenore.
Caldwell County had been, and still was, a largely rural, isolated area. It did not experience as much of the Reconstruction turmoil that was faced by the larger cities and urban areas. However, recovery was hampered by the lack of rail service and a rudimentary road system. National and state political affairs were of little concern to the local citizenry. The rest of the world and their problems seemed far away. The majority of the residents of the county were concentrating on reestablishing and improving their farms.
Farm families toil long hours to raise their crops. They use their yields to feed their families and as barter for goods that they could not produce. Women spun and wove homegrown wool into cloth for clothing. Leather was tanned using the hides of sheep and cattle raised on the farm. Almost every community had a boot or shoemaker. There were numerous grain mills powered by water wheels scattered throughout the county. There was little money to be had. Confederate currency was worthless.
John W. Forney, former Secretary of the United States Senate, visited Caldwell County in 1869.
I am in a county which contributed nearly the entire population to the rebel or Confederate service. Thus, surrounded with Confederate veterans, Confederate women, and Confederate children, I have yet to hear the first unkind word. There is no talk of politics, and yet no repentance, no apology, no explanation of the part they took. They all, with a few exceptions, seem to glory in having been in the war against the government. There is considerable white Republican interest in this section, and the late elections were conducted without violence. There is no newspaper in the 6 counties composing the district. As showing the scarcity of money, I was told last night that in the whole county of Caldwell, there were not 5 men who could lay their hands upon $1,000 of their own money.
In 1868, a new state constitution was adopted. For the first time, all major state and local officials were elected by eligible voters, although not everyone was eligible to vote. The old court of pleas and quarter sessions system was abolished, and a county commission form of government was adopted. Cities and towns began electing their own mayors and councilmen. The 1870 census recorded the county's population at 8,476. Nancy Alexander wrote in Here Will I Dwell,
When the war ended, there were only 300 people living in the town of Lenoir. By 1870, there were 446. Mail was still carried by horseback, and communication was slow, even in town.
During the early 1870s, the county began to emerge from the war's aftermath. Growth and development began to show in Lenoir.
A newspaper article dated November 11, 1875, stated that Lenoir had 11 ministers living within her corporate limits, 2 Episcopal, 3 Presbyterian, and 6 Methodist. There were 3 lawyers, 5 doctors, and 1 dentist, 9 stores, including 1 drugstore, 5 schools, and 2 tanneries. Ezra Shell established a small cabinet shop near the western edge of town. He built a dam across Town Creek and a mill race, which ran a large water wheel providing power for his shop. Henry Reichard, a German cabinet maker, opened Powelltown Furniture Company in March of 1878, run by mule power, an operation which lasted into the 1880s.
Other fledgling manufacturing and service operations began showing up in and around Lenoir. The 1870 Caldwell County Census shows John W. Allen and John R. McCrary operating blacksmith shops, Joshua Setzer operating a harness shop, Noah Spanauer operating a wheelwright shop, Isaac S. Austin a shoemaker's shop, and James L. Heelan a tannery. The cotton mill at Patterson, which was destroyed by Union troops in 1865, was rebuilt. James Gwynn stated in his diary on September 1, 1871,
Went to the sale of the Patterson factory, bought the property at $12,385, paid all but $2,800, gave note for that at 8% payable in 2 years. R.R. Gwynn, Nathan Gwynn, S.F. Harper, and perhaps R.T. Lenoir to carry on the business.
Another diary entry on October 3, 1871 states,
Went with Finn Harper and N.H. Gwynn to Elkin to close up our factory matters.
According to Happy Valley by Felix Hickerson, this was concerning the rebuilding of the factory at Patterson that had been burned. The mill became the county's largest employer and by far the largest industrial establishment.
Almost immediately following the war, the Masonic Lodge was organized in Lenoir under the leadership of Samuel F. Patterson, Clinton A. Silly, and Dr. James M. Spanhauer. The lodge's membership would take a leading role in the county's recovery.
Colonel Silly, a New Hampshire native, had served as an officer in the Union Army. Following the war, he was placed in charge of the Freedmen's Bureau of Western North Carolina. He married Emma, the daughter of James C. Harper of Patterson. He taught and practiced law in Lenoir. He was so well thought of that he became the first worshipful master of the Caldwell Masonic Lodge and was an early mayor of Lenoir. Another of Caldwell County's leading lawyers was George N. Folk, who had served as a captain in the 1st North Carolina Cavalry, later became a colonel in the 65th North Carolina Regiment, and served as a state senator after the war.
In 1882, Colonel Folk purchased Riverside in the Yadkin Valley area and moved his law school there. By that time, it had become a well-known institution drawing boys from many sections of the state. The pupils lived in small houses about the grounds, while the colonel had a large office on the right side of the house where he taught them. He was one of the most prominent and eloquent lawyers in this part of the state.
One of Colonel Folk's students was Thomas M. Vance, youngest son of North Carolina War Governor and later U.S. Senator Zebulon B. Vance. Thomas Vance would open a law office in Lenoir and serve as one of Lenoir's early mayors.
Davenport College reopened after the war. While the buildings had not been destroyed, the facilities had been damaged by Stoneman's army. The college was not the state-of-the-arts institution it had been prior to the war. Many of the college's supporters had been ruined financially by the war, causing much of the college's support to be reduced.
The college continued to operate under the auspices of the South Carolina Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church South until 1870, when the North Carolina Conference was formed and took charge.
Julia Bowden, who was a student at Davenport from 1873 until 1876, kept a diary of her experiences.
I started to Davenport Female College in Lenoir, Caldwell County, North Carolina, on the 14th of September, 1873. I left Davenport the session I was to have graduated. Papa was taken sick, and it was thought he would die. So they sent for me. I got ready to go back after Papa recovered. But alas, I didn't go as the dear old college was burned.
In the diary, Julia tells of both the social and academic opportunities offered by the school. The diary entry on February 5, 1876 states,
We girls went to Belle Ice Pond to see the young gentlemen skate. While we were there, Ella Nicholson and I started on the ice, and just as Ella touched it, it broke and she fell under. She would have been drowned if it had not been for three young gentlemen, Will Bell, Tom Ivy, and Charlie Hamilton.
She tells that the girls were glad that Mr. Roby, the college president, was away and they wouldn't have to say their lessons. Their gladness turned to disappointment when Mr. Roby returned earlier than expected and caught them unprepared. A better academic experience is recorded on April 20th, 1876.
We, Professor Round, Blanche Roby, Carrie Wilburn, Ella Nicholson, and I, students in the astronomy class, went up on the observatory to observe the stars, stargazing. Our class has to stargaze every evening, nearly when it is pleasant.
On February 14, 1877, Davenport College suffered a devastating fire that destroyed the buildings. The Lenoir Topic reported the loss to be $25,000 with no insurance. The people of the county rallied, raising enough money to rebuild the school. The college received another blow when the North Carolina Conference dropped their support of the school. The college resumed a somewhat scaled-back operation about 1881. The building was used part of the time for schools run by Mrs. M.E. Shell and Reverend G.F. Round. During the period from 1884 until 1899, the school was leased to individuals. Will H. Sanborn reintroduced the classical curriculum. After he left to lead the Claremont Female College in Hickory, John D. Minnick headed the school until 1898. Due in great part to the existence of Davenport College, Lenoir gained the cultural reputation as being the Athens of the South.
On March 31, 1886, the town commissioners officially changed the name of South Boundary Street to College Avenue in honor of Davenport College.
There were other schools operating in and around Lenoir during the 1870s. Presbyterian minister Reverend Jesse Rankin, his wife, and his daughters reopened the Kirkwood School on North Main Street. Edward L. Fawcett reestablished the Finley High School, and Clinton A. Seeley established a law school in his home.
The Reverend Johannes O. Eartel contributed both to Lenore's cultural and religious reputation. In 1868, while visiting with his brother in the Catskill Mountains, the Reverend Eartel met an art student, Miss Laura Norwood from Lenore. Miss Norwood's story of the impoverished conditions of her town and her people, combined with her descriptions of the beauty of western North Carolina, convinced Eartel to come to Lenore to help the people and the struggling Church of St. James. Reverend Eartel ministered to the church, set up a school for girls in the rectory, and studied for the priesthood. At the same time, he continued as a painter. He was ordained as a priest in 1871 and served as rector of St. James until 1874.
Earl created the widely recognized painting Rock of Ages. Because the work was not copyrighted, it was pirated, and the painter lost a fortune.
In the 1870s, the Vespers Reading Club was formed. Papers were written to be read at the meetings, and books were distributed among the members. The group formed the Pioneer Library, the forerunner of the present-day public library system.
The club had corresponding members, and in 1882, one of those members was William Sidney Porter, who would later become famous as the short story writer O. Henry.
Lenore was described by J.F. Eartel, son of the Reverend Johannes O. Eartel.
Lenore at that time was an educational center for that section of the South, and several schools were there maintained. Its people were impoverished by the war, and everything was in a sad state, the dilapidation and neglect. But there were culture and refinement. Petty strife and bickering, so common in the average small town, were here unknown. The place was as yet untouched by the spirit of commercialism, and those of every sect and opinion lived together in peace and harmony. All were poor, so poverty was not considered. All needed help, so each helped his neighbor. An ideal place it was indeed for such work as he proposed to do in art, an unlimited field it offered for him as a missionary. Considering all this, and that his home was in the midst of the most beautiful scenery in the world, what wonder that the artist was enthusiastic over the prospect.
The state constitution of 1868 provided for free public education. The county outlined new school districts, and with the new alignment, it was reported that there were over 2,400 white scholars and nearly 450 black scholars. By 1885, there were 62 white school districts and 10 colored districts in the county, each district having a teacher and a one-room schoolhouse.
The decade of the 1870s saw Lenore reestablished as one of the leading mercantile centers of western North Carolina. Surrounding the courthouse in the center of Lenore were 5 general mercantile firms: the stores of Robert Bogle, G.W.F. Harper, Gustav Westman, Samuel Hartley, and M.V. Moore, with the Harper store being by far the largest. There were other stores of various types in Lenore, located on North, South, and West Main Streets. There were 2 hotels in town: the Central Hotel, owned by L.M. Tuttle, managed by Rufus M. Roseborough, and the Jones House, owned by Edmund W. Jones, but being run by a resident manager. In 1872, the Jones family sold the Jones House to W.M. Earnhardt and his wife, who changed the name, first to the Earnhardt House, later to the Mansion House. Both hotels would operate well into the 20th century.
One of Lenore's earliest and oldest stores was started at Heartland, which was then called Tuttle's Crossroads. Marshall M. Courtney and Benedict M. Tuttle opened one of the pioneer stores of the county on May 20th, 1872, when there was still great poverty prevalent. Most of the trade was done through bartering. Country produce, dried herbs, roots, and berries were exchanged for goods. Many purchasers paid in gold dust, which was mined or panned in the Heartland community.
That store was later moved to Lenoir and became Courtney's department store. This firm operated in town for almost 100 years before closing.
Major G.W.F. Harper erected his home, Briarwood, in the 1870s on town lots 27, 28, 29, and 30. The house would be torn down in the 1940s by the town for the construction of Major Harper Park.
Dr. James M. Spainhour built his home on the lot beside the jail in the 1870s. The lot now houses SunTrust Bank. During the 1880s, Major Harper and Dr. Spainhour had a cistern erected on Davenport Hill, collected rainwater, and had the water piped to the college, their homes, and to the county jail. It was the first water system erected in the county.
Dr. A.A. Scroggs built his home on the lot at the corner of North Main and Ash in the 1870s. This lot would contain Rainey's Gulf Station until being torn down for parking in recent years.
Gold was discovered in the county early in the 19th century, during the time that North Carolina was the leading gold producer in the nation. Many of the creeks in the northern part of Caldwell County yielded gold. Following the war, panning and mining for gold became a major occupation for a fairly large number of people who had been ruined by the war. In 1875, the county's first newspaper, the Caldwell Messenger, a small weekly paper published by James C. Nutty, appeared. Mr. Nutty moved to Lenoir from Ashe County and set up the press in an old building on South Main Street.
Interested men of the town and county made various attempts following the end of the war to start a newspaper in the county. When the Caldwell Messenger appeared on the streets on September 25, 1875, quite a stir was created among the citizenry. Its birth was produced by an old hand-operated press that previously belonged to Benjamin Franklin, on which he published the Pennsylvania Gazette.
In late 1876, Mr. Nutty sold the Messenger to a group of local investors that changed the name of the newspaper to the Lenoir Topic. In 1919, the newspaper would merge with another local paper, the Lenoir News, resulting in the creation of the Lenoir News Topic.
The early editions of the newspaper show that Lenoir was not only surviving, but growing and thriving. Advertisements appeared for an unusually large array of mercantile firms, small manufacturing establishments, grocery stores, drugstores, doctors, dentists, and numerous lawyers.
In 1876, the population of Lenoir was estimated to be 598 people. Recovery was interrupted in June of 1876 when major flooding wiped out most of the crops in virtually all of the grist and sawmills, including John L. Bradley's mill on Kings Creek and Marcus Dill's mill on Little River. The devastating fire at Davenport College emphasized the need for an organized firefighting effort. 2 months after the fire, a bucket brigade, the beginnings of the Lenoir Fire Department, was formed. Later, the town purchased a horse-drawn fire engine and built a small structure to house it and a horse on South Main Street next to the jail. On June 1, 1877, the county witnessed its only known public hanging. Isaac Berry, who had been convicted of murdering his wife some 10 years before, was hanged at a specially built gallows beside the jail. The 1880 census listed 422 people in the town of Lenoir, while the county boasted 10,291 residents. The county had recovered from the war, and a period of prosperity lay ahead.
Lenoir was still the only organized town in the county, but there were several loosely organized communities, usually surrounding a general store and a post office, scattered throughout the county. Among these were Patterson, Collegeville, Hudsonville, and Somerville.
The coming of the railroad to Caldwell County would be the dawning of a new day. Railroad service had been available to Hickory Tavern in Catawba County since the middle 1850s. During the late 1870s and early 1880s, a group of local investors, led by G.W.F. Harper, began a drive to bring the railroad into Caldwell County through Lenoir and hopefully into eastern Tennessee.
Actual grading and construction for the Chester and Lenoir Narrow Gauge Railroad was initiated June 4th, 1874, 2 months and 8 days following the exciting groundbreaking ceremonies on March 27, 1874. James Harper was chosen to break ground with assistance of Reverend Rankin and Colonel Green Moore. Following the invocation by Reverend Jesse Rankin, 3 other ministers, Reverend Ivy, Reverend Rankin, and Reverend Bell, joined Reverend Rankin in dumping 5 wheelbarrows of earth into the grading. Orator for the occasion was Captain M.V. Moore. Even ladies plied shovels and mattocks, one being Mrs. J.O. Ertle, wife of the Episcopal minister. Girls from Kirkwood, St. Euphemia, and Davenport then yielded to the boys from Finley High School, who wielded the implements with youthful bravado, and then everyone present fell to with vigor.
On February 7, 1884, with the completion of the bridge spanning the Catawba River, the first train entered Caldwell County. Since all the grading to Lenoir had already been finished, construction proceeded quickly throughout the spring.
May 17, 1884 was an exciting day for the town of Lenoir when the first freight train carrying the railroad workers arrived at the station. Everyone who could possibly do so was there for the historic event.
On June 4, 1884, the first passenger train arrived. The train's engineer was Columbus M. Weathers, and the first passenger was John M. Bernhardt, coming home from Davidson College for summer vacation. Later that week, a celebration was held for the opening of the newly constructed depot. In The Legacy of the Carolina and Northwestern Railroad, a description of the occasion is given.
The celebration was attended by an estimated 5,000 people, even though the population of the town was only around 400 people. Officials from the surrounding counties attended the festivity, which consisted of 2 speeches, one by the Lenoir mayor and one by the president of the CC&A Railroad. It was noted that both speeches were of good length and good style and elicited repeated applause from the vast crowd.
The ability to ship products by rail to potential markets fueled the growth of new industry that would take place in the latter part of the 19th and the early 20th centuries. The dreams of extending the railroad into Tennessee were never realized. Edgemont became the terminus of the line. Shortly after the arrival of the first train to Lenoir, a major fire almost destroyed the town. On June 14, 1884, the old wooden building owned by the Ballou family on North Main Street, which housed the printing press of the Lenoir Topic, caught fire. Before the fire could be extinguished, an entire block of buildings burned, with the conflagration almost consuming the courthouse and the row of buildings across the street.
W.W. Scott and W.C. Irvin, owners of the Topic, aided by Dr. J.M. Spanhauer, were able to secure temporary quarters and continue printing the paper until a new building could be erected for their use at the corner of what is now Harper Avenue and Mulberry Street. The building they built would later house the Pioneer Library.
The second cotton mill in the county was built in 1883 by Abel A. Shuford of Hickory, along with Pleasant Green Moore and Nathan Hunt Gwynn of Caldwell. This mill was erected on the site of the old iron forge near the present town of Granite Falls.
In 1882, members of the Moore family of the Globe community of northern Caldwell County decided that there was a need for an educational facility in that area. Robert Logan Patton was persuaded to come to the Globe to be the principal of Globe Academy. He ran the institution until 1885, when Joseph F. Spanhauer, Patton's brother-in-law, took over the school. Globe Academy operated until the 1916 flood swept the entire community away.
A group of local investors met in November of 1885 and organized the Lenoir Telegraph Company. They sold stock and began work on the erection of poles and stringing wires, all during 1886. On March 16, 1887, the system was connected with the Western Union Telegraph System, and the first telegraph was sent to Lenoir.
The book, Hudson Heritage, gives the following information.
Hudsonville came into being in 1880, being named for the Hudson brothers, Monroe and Johnny. Monroe and Johnny Hudson of South Carolina were among the first lumbermen into the area and became leaders of the town. Monroe Hudson operated a store in which he lived and also ran the Hudsonville Post Office, established in 1889. Mail bound for Hudsonville was often confused with mail bound from Hendersonville, so around 1889 the Ville was dropped and the town henceforth became known as Hudson.
On September 12, 1875, the Berea Advent Christian Church was organized in Collinsville. It was the first church of the Advent Christian faith in Caldwell County.
Baptists were the most predominant religious group in the rural area of the county. On October 22, 1885, 16 churches met at the Rocky Springs Baptist Church in Collinsville to organize the Caldwell Baptist Association. At the first session, a resolution endorsing the building of a church in the town of Lenoir was adopted.
On August 18, 1889, 18 charter members formed the Lenoir Baptist Church. The name was later changed to First Baptist Church of Lenoir. They built their first sanctuary at the corner of Spring Street, now Harper Avenue, and Church Street. Lenoir now boasted 4 churches in the town. In 1885, Miss Emily Pruden and Miss Elizabeth Kennedy established a small school near Hudson. It later became the Ebenezer Mitchell Industrial Home and School. The school later moved to Missenheimer and became a part of what is now Pfeiffer University.
In 1888, Citizens Building and Loan, the first financial institution in the county, was formed. Its creation spurred a new wave of development, especially new home construction. In 1893, the Bank of Lenoir, the county's first bank, was formed, allowing people a safe home for their money and an easier way to pay their bills. On February 29, 1888, the Caldwell and Watauga Land and Timber Company was formed. The company built the first major subdivision in Lenoir, the Norwood, High Brighton Street area, named Oakview in honor of President Grover Cleveland's home. The area was part of the old Tucker's Barn tract and the Norwood family plantation.
The first street lights, 16 kerosene oil lamps, were lit at dusk on August 29, 1888 in Lenoir. It was reported that they made the town look like Broadway in New York City.
The end of the 19th century also witnessed the birth of the lumber industry in the county. At this time, Lenoir was the center of the lumber business in this section of the state. Nancy Alexander quotes an October 30, 1889 newspaper article.
The lumber business of Lenoir is growing every day. Shipments of lumber should be made in manufactured shape. Cross ties, staves, rims, etc. are the principal kinds shipped. Pine lumber is all kept here for home consumption.
In 1885, Mr. F. Weisenfeld established a large sawmill and lumber yard at the depot. His company contracted with the Piedmont Wagon Company of Hickory to supply more than 600,000 board feet of white oak lumber for their operation. He ran as many as 15 wagons and employed more than 20 men bringing in logs to the mill, sawing, and shipping the lumber by rail to Hickory.
In 1889, a group of local men banded together to create the Lenoir Furniture Factory. The enterprise was not a rousing success. but it would be the genesis of an industry that would become the county's mainstay during the 20th century.
Despite their busy life, the people did find time for enjoyment. The Lenoir Topic describes typical winter activities of the young people of Lenoir in January 1886.
The thermometer registered 6 below zero Wednesday morning, making 5 mornings in succession that the thermometer was below zero. The coasters made a tobogganway on College Hill, and the young ladies and gentlemen had a fine time, judging by their merry shouts. The skaters continuously occupied the ice on Lake Marybelle, and Thursday night, by the beautiful rays of the Arctic moon, the skating was kept up until a very late hour, and hundreds visited the lake to see the fun. The streets and the roads were in fine condition before the snow fell, making the sleighing very fine after the snow, and the jingle of the bell has been kept up almost all the time. Even the intense cold did not stop the determined sleighers.
In the rural areas, the churches and the schools were the center of the community. Corn shuckings, barn raisings, and quilting bees provided opportunities for socializing as well as a way of getting the work done.
A good singing teacher would go to a community and conduct a singing school for 2 weeks, day and night. The cost of his services would be $15 plus room and board.
Traveling peddlers, with their wagons loaded down a large variety of wares, provided goods in the rural areas which could not be raised on the farm. The noise made by the tin pots and pans hung on the wagons caused people to call them racket wagons. The name would later carry over to the 5 and dime stores, which became known as racket stores.
Granite Falls, named for the rock formation on Gunpowder Creek, began to grow in the 1880s around S.G.H. Jones' store, which was built in the 1850s. The site of the town is close to the location of the area's earliest industrial enterprise, Andrew Baird's Iron Forge, which operated in the late 1780s.
On March 6, 1899, the General Assembly of North Carolina passed legislation stating that the town of Granite Falls in the county of Caldwell, being the same, is hereby incorporated under the name and style of the town of Granite Falls. The town limits were also set, beginning at a point in the Carolina and Northwestern Railroad, 3/8 miles south of Depot, and running with said road about 1 mile 3/8 mile wide on each side of said railroad. On May 2, 1899, the town elected R.F. Hefner as their first mayor. The first councilmen were James Houck, Dr. A.D. Jones, and H.C. Mackey.
In the decade prior to incorporation, the post office had changed its name from Lovelady to Granite and eventually to Granite Falls. A Baptist church was founded in Granite Falls in June of 1890. Methodists had a meeting house in the area for over 80 years, and Philadelphia Lutheran had begun some 25 years earlier. On December 5, 1888, it was announced that the Granite Falls Manufacturing Company had invested in an electric lighting plant, the first use of electric power in Caldwell County. In 1890, the Dudley Lumber Company was formed. Russell's store was opened in 1892. Granite Falls is located on the main road between Lenoir and Hickory. Its leading industries were textiles, sash cord, twine, and hosiery manufacturing. It was surrounded by fertile farmlands and a dense rural population. The town of Lenoir had a population of approximately 600 people in 1890.
In 1892, a massive fire beginning in the old Gustav Westman store building on the square destroyed nearly the entire block on the east side of South Main Street. The Charter Oak tree on the square was killed during the fire. As a result of the fire, no more wooden buildings were allowed to be built in town.
In 1895, Mr. George Moore built the roller mill in town. This enterprise eventually led to the demise of the numerous grain mills spread throughout the county.
The first telephone service in the county was established in Lenoir in 1896. It consisted of a switchboard located in the back of Lenoir building and 8 subscribers. The number of subscribers grew as the people realized the convenience of the telephone.
As the 1800s drew to a close and a new millennium was on the horizon, the country found itself involved in the Spanish-American War in Cuba. Again, Caldwell County was called upon to send her finest young men.
Colonel Edmund Jones obtained permission to raise a volunteer company, and he enlisted 47 men from Caldwell, Burke, and Watauga counties. On May 17, 1898, it is estimated that approximately 1,000 people saw them off at the depot as the train pulled out to rousing cheers. In Raleigh, they became a part of the 2nd Regiment and later went to Tybee Island off the coast of Georgia. The men never got any closer to Cuba than Georgia. A handful of Caldwell men serving with another unit did see action in Cuba, including one who was wounded in a skirmish around Havana.
As the 19th century came to a close, Caldwell County was again moving forward. The county's population was 15,694, while the town of Lenoir boasted more than 1,000 residents.
The county had outgrown its courthouse and jail, both built in the early 1840s. The county commissioners began the construction of a new jail on the site of the old one in 1899. They began planning for a new and larger courthouse, which would be moved from the center of town. Both buildings would be completed in the early 1900s.
The furniture industry, with all of its supporting services, would begin to grow, eventually becoming the leading industry and employer in the county. The cotton mill industry stood on the verge of explosive growth. Education would become more readily available for both men and women. Employment opportunities for women outside the home would expand exponentially. The other towns of the county, especially Hudson and Granite Falls, would begin to grow and develop. With the coming of the 20th century, the citizens of Caldwell County looked toward a bright future.